Hi, my name's David. This is my video application for the full-time MBA program for the fall of 2017. I'd like to point out that I'm aware that I'm in a hoodie in a messy bedroom, and this is also the first time I've tried to record this video, and the first time I've also articulated the things that I'm going to talk about during this video. So bear with me if anxiousness and whatnot comes about as I'm talking. So I discussed a little bit in my application about forming a company that would survive essentially a currency crisis, and I wanted to take the video opportunity to go into more detail about why I see this happening, what I've kind of learned that structures the thought process and vision of going down the idea of why the United States dollar will eventually fail. I do not have, an exact conclusion as to exactly why or when that would happen, and I don't feel that I'm educated in the sense to make that kind of conclusion. But as I'll demonstrate through some of these pictures that I've drawn, I can show you what I personally see and what I'm sure that other people who are insightful into the monetary system and financial institutions probably see as well. So here I have something that pretty much demonstrates what I see as the flow of money. And for the sake of me being able to not have to stare at the screen, I'm going to pull this away so I can view it and talk about it. So you essentially have the US government, the Treasury Department, that just creates money, creates dollar bills and cash. From my understanding, when the US government needs to spend money, they issue bonds and are loaned money from the Federal Reserve, which is not a government organization, but rather a private bank. So the US government prints money. This money is essentially loaned to the government by the Federal Reserve, and the government issues bonds, which then get sold to foreign nations. So foreign nations now have a monetary tie to the US government, and the US government then spends this money on things like defense equipment. So they use that money to purchase goods from private companies like Lockheed Martin, for instance, for defense equipment. So that money goes into the private system. When Lockheed Martin receives that money is then going to transfer over to a financial institution as a deposit. So the financial institution, under Federal Reserve regulations, only has to hold on to 10% of those deposits, and they can therefore loan out the other 90% of that money to businesses or consumers. So that financial institution loans out that money, a consumer or business receives it, and then that money eventually gets deposited back into either potentially the same or a different financial institution. Then that financial, then we'll speak in the sake of a deposit form. That deposit, 10% of it gets held into that financial institution, the other 90% gets loaned out. Then that 90% of that deposit then gets deposited into another financial institution. And then 10% of that gets loaned out, et cetera, et cetera. So that essentially, to me, in my vision, it's an endless creation of money through financial institutions, never ending. And when I'm done speaking about the next part of this, I will push this picture into the camera view so you can visually see it easier, because it's kind of difficult for me to kind of have this pushed against the camera and be able to view it so I can know what I'm talking about at the same time. So I guess I'm at that point now. So here is the endless creation of money through financial institutions, going down and down and down. And if you have the opportunity, you can hopefully relate to what I just verbalized into this visual piece of artwork that I've created to demonstrate the flow of money and how it's just essentially getting created. So to create another simple visualization, which I will show you before I start to verbalize this, you have this graph here, which essentially demonstrates that the government is essentially just creating and increasing the money supply through these issues of bonds and when they need to spend money. So underneath that, you have the ultimately endless increase in the government debt. And on the other side of this graph, this is not representing a negative number, but just the opposite direction increase in money supply, you also have financial institutions creating money through that process that I hopefully articulated in a understandable format to you 2 minutes ago. Through the loans, and the financial institutions are essentially just creating endless money through the loan process, and also creating essentially what I see as a never-ending increase in debt through the loans that they're distributing. So it's kind of like a two-way street where there's two opposite directions of money being created and two opposite directions of debt happening at the same time. And essentially, the bottom line, debt, is counteracting the top line money supply, if that makes sense. And again, I'm going to state that I am by no means an expert at the details of financial institutions or government monetary policy. So I'm trying to articulate this as best as possible. And this is also the first time that I have verbally tried to communicate what's going on these sheets of paper and in my head. So just another random idea that I'm going to plant into your face that doesn't necessarily flow from what I was just talking about. The Federal Reserve has this goal of maintaining inflation at a 2% rate. So, and their logic behind that is if they maintain a goal of positive inflation, deflation will never occur. If you're like me and you believe in a free market society, I don't consider that being in relation to a free market, because you're not letting currency values flow freely through the economy, but rather, as you maintain a goal of a inflation rate of 2%, you're bound to want to increase the money supply to maintain a growth rate of inflation. So, to kind of visualize what a 2% goal of inflation is doing to the money supply, when you take 2% of 1, that's 0.2, but then when you add 2% of that 1.2, that 2% is growing, if that makes sense. So when you have a pie and the pie is getting bigger, 2% of the pie is getting bigger. So essentially, the money supply is going to increase at an exponential rate, as I've demonstrated here through that process. All right, moving on to the next slide. So here is a regular basic demonstration of a deposit going into a financial institution by this happy consumer up here. So I've only demonstrated through two products of a financial institution here, which is a loan and also a mortgage-backed security, which I will state I by no means. Essentially, my understanding of a mortgage-backed security is coming from the movie The Big Short. So a consumer, you deposit your money into the bank, and then, like I kind of talked about earlier, that money's getting loaned out, redeposited into a bank, 10% that's getting held, the rest is getting loaned out, et cetera, et cetera. And it's kind of just an endless loan cycle down the pathway. And from what I understand about a mortgage-backed security and the CDOs that are involved with that, essentially the bank sells a mortgage-backed security, and that is a bunch of loans bundled together that the purchaser of the mortgage-backed security is receiving revenue from through the interest payments on the mortgage that's within that security itself. And then they're distributing CDOs, which are betting on the adamant failure or non-failure of the mortgage-backed security above it. So there's kind of just CDOs being sold that are betting on the mortgage-backed security above it. There's things like tranches and whatnot that's probably that I don't completely understand, and that the person watching this video in the application process isn't probably going to understand, and essentially would be something that I would want to understand more coming into what I'm trying to learn and accomplish through my MBA. So again, like the loans, it's essentially just this endless cycle of creating CDOs to bet on the above CDO and eventually betting on the mortgage-backed security that they're all betting on. And in my eyes, in a basic sense, it's just a way to accumulate more money into the bank from outside sources. So another thought, they're creating all this money through loans and then just getting it redistributed back into the bank that they're creating through these other products that are essentially endless scheme to get more money into their system. And essentially, a financial institution is just making money based off of money. Another picture that I drew that was a thought that went through my mind was, here's a bathtub. You've got this pool of stuff, cash, stocks, bonds, houses, value on food, crooked man, and their ego and head. And this bathtub, so you get the value, we'll call this just the value of everything. The dollar, the bonds, whatever. It's everything that has value in a dollar sense in this world thrown in this tub, and this tub's just getting bigger. The value of everything's increasing as the money supply increases, and it's just filling up, getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And in my eyes, eventually this bathtub is just going to overflow and cause a problem. Here is a chart that demonstrates growth of the money supply. So starting in the middle here, let's say this middle circle is the initial money supply of the United States of America. And then this little piece of the pie graph I have here is maybe the total value of all automobiles in the economy. Obviously, this isn't to scale of the actual monetary system, but for simple needs, this is how I'm going to explain it. The money supply increases, the value of the car you're buying is increasing through inflation. So a car that was sold for $5,000 in 1970 is selling for $30,000 today. But as a percentage of the total money supply, the actual value of all these cars isn't changing. So in reality, all the automobiles in the world still accumulate 10% of the value of all the money supply. So in my eyes, what that means is the actual value of any physical good or service isn't changing. The attachment I have to the iMac that I'm currently videotaping this on, or any physical piece of matter in this room, isn't changing. I still feel the same connection to it. There's just essentially a number attachment to it that's changing as the money supply increases. So I'd like to take that idea one step further, and this is something that I actually distributed a personally written article on my LinkedIn profile if you would like to read my perception on that and how it was probably about 12 months ago, or maybe a little longer than that. So here's the same pie. You've got the initial money supply, and here's this piece of pie here is maybe the percentage of the money supply an individual bank possesses. So as this money supply increases, the bank is probably going to be increasing the number of deposits they're receiving, and therefore increasing their control of the money supply, as you would think. However, from a bank growth standpoint, let's say this pie here, or this piece of the pie here, goes from, I have written here for simplicity needs, $1. I'm a bank that has $1. Money supply increases, my bank now owns or possesses $2. However, as a total percentage of this money supply, the actual percentage of that supply has decreased. The money supply grows. This bank now possesses $3. But wait, the actual percentage of the money supply that this bank possesses is decreasing. So the conclusion that I'm just trying to draw, or perception I'm trying to create based on that fact, is bank growth isn't really real, in a sense that as a financial institution grows their assets as the money supply grows, but they're actually losing essentially market share of the product that they're trying to possess, US dollars, the bank actually isn't growing. So I think that is an idea that could be expanded upon and looked at in terms of something like financial institution analysis. So as I stretch my mind down and look at, in my eyes, the ridiculousness of the system that is currently in place, and essentially, dare I say, a scheme for financial institutions to essentially just grow and make more money off of money by creating money. I also have some notes written down on essentially, if the time were to come that something like the U.S. dollar were to lose all its value, how do you handle that situation? Do you plan now to try to form something that's going to prevent that from happening, or does it need to fail? So, basic pros and cons of both ideas. If I create some kind of firm that protects itself from currency fluctuation, excuse me while I put my phone on mute, and I'm able to somehow through the private sector gain control of the currency and for positive ethical reasons and prevent something like that from happening, do you do that in a sense where, this company essentially stops something like I said, the dollar collapsing, and also the consequences of that, which to an extreme level in my mind would be like chaotic anarchy, because if money were to just disappear, nobody's going to do their jobs, nobody's going to be running the government, food is going to be, there'll be problems with food. You can let your mind go imagination. I don't want to say it would be World War Z, but there's a legit possibility that that's what would happen if the dollar were to just kind of lose its value completely overnight. I've not studied past currency problems like hyperinflation and whatnot, but I just kind of let my mind and imagination run on that. So, looking at the idea of it failing, and I base this also off of my observation of the financial crisis of 2008 and 2009, where essentially these banks made these really bad mistakes, and we'll call them mistakes, through giving out easy loans and creating all these financial products that are betting on the payment of these loans. The financial crisis occurs. Clearly, there's this major problem, and the government kind of just came in and gave them money to maintain stability and continue on with, their own existence. And I understand the grounds of the government doing something like that to prevent massive job loss and massive greater financial problems than occurred. However, from my basic understanding, I'm pretty sure that financial institutions just pretty much turned around and continued doing exactly what they were doing before the financial crisis. So nobody's really learning any kind of lesson here. Like, companies in the private sector cannot sit here and assume that the government's just going to bail them out for them taking really risky positions in something and, essentially experimenting with average consumers' money that they go to work and spend 8 hours a day earning. So in my eyes, something like that's never going to change if the government continues to do what they're doing. So, is there some kind of logic behind, if I'm aware that the system's going to fail, if there's hedge fund managers out there that consciously are thinking the same thing as me, if there's academic professionals that are also seeing the same thing, does it fail? Like, is society actually going to, in the super long term, progress forward in a sense where if massive catastrophe happens, something new and better might come out of that? So on that note, could you create something new and better that would exist beyond the collapse of the dollar and prevent, cities from being burned to the ground while this is happening, and kind of plan out a transition into well, here's our current state of capitalism. Here's a system of economics that we think would be better in the future. How do we transition from this point A to point B without catastrophe happening? I don't think something like the U.S. dollar collapsing would happen for a long time. At least 2 decades is just what comes to mind. But so there's ethical and logical and moral hazards between every decision possible making in terms of trying to plan out some kind of scheme to essentially prevent currency crisis in the world. Another thought that comes to mind is if there's something that comes to fruition that essentially prevents financial disaster, are the people that are running these other financial institutions that are observing and in knowledge of exactly what's going on within their financial institutions, where do you place them in this new transitional economics system if they're to make logical, ethical decisions? That's not going to go disrupt and take advantage of this new system that they're in. So again, lots of questions behind the ideas that I'm throwing at you through this video. So that's all I wrote down in my notebook as I was taking notes and thinking about this video. I also did not want to sit down and plan out this video and end up confusing myself, because this is the first time I have articulated this video and my notes to a camera, and I wanted to just present that to you in a format that that I'm not here trying to sell myself. I'm here presenting a problem that I want to help fix and be a part of the process to do that. So that's why I'm wearing this Under Armour black hoodie in my bedroom with tax forms all over the ground and a bed that's unmade, and I look unprofessional, because this problem goes beyond wearing a button-down shirt to work tomorrow and what I'm doing to make more money the following day, but rather the fact that people are going to go about probably continuing their day-to-day lives looking to make a lot of money and looking to do whatever we're doing in our social environment, when in reality, we're all within this little global economic bubble that is probably going to have severe problems in the future, and that is probably what needs to be looked at now, whether a solution is created now or planned out or whatever. So that is all I have to say for now. Thank you for your time and viewing this video application, and I look forward to being able to discuss these things further in the future with those people that are interested. Thanks.